Okay then, let us continue, and I will introduce our penultimate speaker. By the way, just to say a small thank you, Blake is running our AV and our live stream and everything else. Super grateful for you, man. Thank you so much. It is one of those, as many people are aware, to know somebody, to have somebody who has skills is a wondrous thing. And so you got to have them. So very, very grateful. Thank you for doing all of that. Let me introduce Benjamin Carlucci to you. Right, Benjamin is a Pittsburgh-based artist and filmmaker whose work spans short films, narrative features, and the less compelling commercial projects that tend to pay better. Art versus survival. Over the past decade, his award-winning films have screened at festivals on every continent, including Antarctica? Nah, never. In venues ranging from folding chairs in the basement of a rural library to the red velvet seats at Short Films Corner of the Cannes Film Festival. Beyond the production world, he served as a judge at film festivals across the US, a panelist for regional arts grants, and a guest lecturer at notable Pittsburgh acting and filmmaking institutions. An avid armchair theologian, Benjamin harbors an inordinate and often scattershot obsession with the study of early Christian history and the development of theology. His Substack, Grasping at Echoes, explores the intersection of theology and media, tracing how stories shape our imagination and imagination shapes our beliefs. Stories shape our imagination and imagination shapes our beliefs. He is currently immersed in post-production on his second feature film, Saint Mick, a contemplative comedy about faith, nuns, and rock and roll. Learn more, if you will, at benty.com, benty.com, and let me pass you over to Benjamin Carlucci.
Nothing in my talk today has anything to do with nuns or rock and roll. But thank you for having me. It's very fun to be here. I've been enjoying the presentations all day, even if the ones preceding me have stolen all my Tolkien quotes. But this is a novel experience for me. Normally, coming from the film world, when I present my work, I am sitting in the back of the room as my work is up on screen. So being in front of all the watching eyes is going to be a novel experience for me. So, let's jump in. The most relatable Tolkien quote I have ever found comes from a letter prepended to the second edition of the Silmarillion. Addressing his friend Milton Waldman in 1951, Tolkien wrote, "It is difficult to say anything without saying too much. The attempt to say a few words opens a floodgate of excitement. The egoist and artist at once desires to say how the stuff has grown, what it is like, and what he thinks he means or is trying to represent by it all." And I can think of no pithier summary for my presentation today as I attempt to weave together speculative theology with creative applications of Tolkien's legendarium, all through the guiding hermeneutic of the filmmaking process. In what follows, I will suggest that the Christian story of creation is best understood not as a series of separate divine acts, but as a single creative work into which we are invited as participants, and all of which is oriented redemptively. And as Tolkien helpfully caveats, it is difficult to say any of this without excitement prompting me to say too much. So I beg your patience as I do my best to, as the professor charmingly phrases it in his next sentence, inflict some of this upon you. So, let's jump into it. Tolkien's world begins with music. Eru Ilúvatar's first creative act is to instruct the Ainur, the offspring of his mind, and the gods or angelic powers of the legendarium, in how to make music. Three themes unfold within this supernal melody. In the first, the rebellious Melkor introduces discord into the Ainur's harmony. Iluvatar responds with a second theme that wrestles with that discord. And finally, a third theme emerges, greater and more beautiful, weaving even Melkor's insurrection into a greater and final consonance. Together, these three themes comprise the Ainulindale, or the music of the Ainur, and like an overture before a symphony, they contain the entire theme of the creation to come in its completeness while preceding its temporal unfolding. This is the story of the beginning, and the beginning already contains the end. Our colloquial understanding of the Bible's creation account follows a similar pattern, though we have a tendency to imagine these stages as completely separate from each other. We speak of creation as a discrete act brought to completion in the distant past, succeeded by this present reality in which we currently reside, to be followed by new creation as yet another composite act in the distant future, where this present reality reaches a climactic ending, the cosmos as we know it dissipates, and something completely new begins. Sometimes the entire biblical narrative is mapped onto this pattern of creation, fall, redemption, and new creation. And I would like to begin today by challenging that assumption. Rather than seeing each of these as sort of separate eras, we got the eras quote earlier, I suggest that they are better understood as coextensive movements within a continuous and singular creative act. When Tolkien's story and the Christian tradition are read together in this way, three closely related insights emerge. There's already been a lot of threes today, and there's going to be a lot more threes in this. And I will expend the rest of this paper exploring these three things. The first is, as I've just suggested, creation is not a series of disconnected divine acts, but a single creative process unfolding through time. Second, that work is participatory. Creatures play a role in shaping the world, and more amazingly, in the making of humanity itself. And third, because this work moves towards fulfillment rather than abandonment and replacement, the struggles of the present are not the final word, but the hope in that truth is only known through a glimpse of the story's end, and our understanding must be contextualized within the limits of that perception. Therefore, from our perspective, creation itself is inherently a process of redemption. So to help make sense of these claims, let's talk about filmmaking. So filmmaking has many stages and many ways of organizing them, but the most common summary of the filmmaking process splits it into three primary phases. Pre-production, which involves storyboarding, script writing, casting, and other preparatory logistics. Production, which is the actual filming. And post-production, which includes everything from editing to sound design to all the other finishing touches that bring a movie to the big screen. And while these appear to be distinct and isolated stages in most cases, there is a creative voice guiding this entire process. In the indie world which I hail from, you tend to find self-driven vehicles where a single artist directs a script that he or she has written. And as they are the ones pushing to get it made, they often take an involved role in all of these phases. This creative drive represents a unity of vision, and while it progresses and changes in the process of bringing the film to fruition, it is ultimately singular. All of these steps lead towards a single goal, the bringing about of an initial vision to its completed form. And as such, those early steps of pre-production cannot be separated from their final purpose. In this way, pre-production can be seen as an overture, just like the Ainur's music, prefiguring all that is to come and simultaneously being the means by which it is brought about. But just as the Ainur's vision was incomplete, unable to see the fullness of what was sung, there are often steps along the way that do not make sense until the final edit. Sometimes actors or crew members will struggle to see how the sequences they're crafting will fit into the final product. Sometimes they haven't even seen a completed script while they're making the movie. And so these questions are not resolved until they're actually watching the film. It takes patience and trust to allow a film to progress through the process of creative maturation. And to restate this in theological terms, let's turn now to Irenaeus of Lyon. Writing in the 2nd century, Irenaeus' theological framework for the creation account can seem utterly alien to ours. The conventional picture of a prelapsarian Eden, a perfect, sinless garden where an immortal Adam and Eve dwell in perfection, is completely absent in his telling of the story. Much like Melkor's discord appearing in the very first theme of Iluvatar's music, mortality, suffering, and other aspects usually associated with the Christian fall are seen by Irenaeus as natural to the created order. He famously viewed Adam and Eve not as perfected humans in a pre-fallen state, but as infants who needed to grow into maturity. A quote from his work on the apostolic preaching describes the man as very little, since he was an infant and it was necessary for him to reach full development by growing in this way. And later he restates this in saying, the man was a young child, not yet having achieved a perfect deliberation, and because of this he was easily deceived by the seducer. Now, notably, this view eliminates the distinction between creation as a completed act and this present fallen reality as something separate. For Irenaeus, the economy of God necessitates the growth of mankind, for humans to increase in maturity so as to grow into their inheritance, and thus this present existence is not a diversion from or a sequel to creation, but part of the creation process itself. A few centuries later, Gregory of Nyssa picks up on this thread, speaking in regards to the creation account in Genesis 1. He says, when the account says that God made the human being, all humankind is indicated by the indefinite character of the term. For the creature was not also here called Adam, as the narrative that follows relates, but the name given to the created human is not the particular, but the universal. Thus we are led by the universal name of the nature to suppose something such as this, that by divine foreknowledge and power, all humanity is included in the first formation. Gregory sees the creation account of Genesis 1 functioning exactly like the music of the Ainer. Just as the music encapsulates all of creation in its melody, despite preceding it, so the 7 days of creation are not only a prelude to history, but a summary. Again, an overture. When God says, let us make mankind, Gregory sees him as speaking of all mankind, the entirety of the human race, because only the entirety of the human race can truly, collectively be said to be made in the image of God. Like Irenaeus before him, this view radically alters our timeline, as from this perspective, the 7 days of creation were not completed in the primeval past, but we could in fact say that we are still presently living on day 6 of God's creative work. And because this locates us within the economy of unfolding creation, Irenaeus would also insist that this perspective is the only one from which we can say anything theologically. While we curious types love speculating about hypotheticals, Irenaeus is insistent that we should only speak of things as they are, not as they could be, and that following from that understanding, we must assess our present circumstances in light of the end that is to come. As patristic scholar John Baer summarizes, what Paul posits as a typological correlation between Adam and Christ, Irenaeus expands into an all-embracing account of the economy of God, understanding the end in terms of the beginning, with the end in turn shedding light on the beginning. Irenaeus theologizes strictly from within this economy, from what can in fact be known and spoken about with the right hermeneutic of God's activity and revelation in Christ. He resists any attempt to seek a higher perspective, to speak about God prior to and independent from creation, a standpoint that would have to be superhuman and indeed above God himself. To attempt to speak from such a perspective would, for Irenaeus, be not only presumptuous, but also groundless. God's continually creative work throughout the economy, resulting in the end in the one who is in the image and likeness of God, is salvation. So, if, as Baer, Irenaeus, and Gregory all suggest, creation is not a completed act in our collective past, but a single work unfolding towards a given end, the question that naturally follows is, what role do we, as creatures, play within that work? How do we reconcile the idea that all of creation is encapsulated in a completed story with the ending written, even as history unfolds in the middle of the story? Are Gregory and Irenaeus and Tolkien just providing beautiful ways of saying that destiny is written, the script is set, and we are just puppets dragged along by invisible strings? How'd that get there? Despite my utilization of a filmmaking metaphor throughout this paper, I do not intend to suggest that the script is written for us and we are simply reciting lines. Instead, what I believe this teaches us is that the project of God is participatory. The Einar join the song and then wander into the world they shape to partake in its unfolding. They are not passive agents, but a word we've heard many times today, sub-creators, a favorite phrase of Tolkien's. He uses it in several contexts, again, many of which we've wonderfully heard today, but it's often summarized poetically by seeing sub-creation as a refraction of God's own light, or perhaps you could even say in Lord of the Rings terms of the flame imperishable. I'm sure almost everyone in this room is familiar with the poem, man, sub-creator, the refracted light, through whom is splintered from a single white to many hues and endlessly combined in living shapes that move from mind to mind through all the crannies of the world we filled. Subcreation was always Iluvatar's goal for his creatures, God and man alike. Their participation, their freedom, was the original creative design, not a reaction to what went wrong. Likewise, within the created order, God grants us freedom, choices that meaningfully affect the world around us. This freedom is not an arbitrary test on God's part, but a fundamental necessity for what it is to be a rational spirit, and more so, a significant aspect of what it is to be made in the image of God. God is the creator, but there is a distinction between his making of the cosmos and his making of man. In Genesis, all things are brought into existence by divine fiat. Let there be, and there was. And by this, God brings about plants, animals, dry land, the sun, moon, stars, but picking up with another quote from John Baer, then having declared all those things into existence by word alone, setting the stage, as it were, God, not with an imperative, but a subjunctive, announces, let us make the human being in our image after our likeness. This is the only thing about which God specifically deliberates. It is his divine purpose and resolve. And it is this that is brought to conclusion in Christ, the first true human being, the image of God, and then in those who follow him. This means then that the particular project of God to create a human being in his image and likeness is not accomplished simply by divine fiat then and there. It depends rather upon the fiat of Christ and those who also in Christ give their own let it be. We are the ones addressed by God when he says, let us make a human being in our image. And if the project of God is the making of the human being, then for us to be truly God's image bearers, we must become makers participating in that project. We are to pursue the same letting of light and loving of beauty that God enacts in his crafting of the cosmos, not simply through derivative creativity, but through the making of mankind itself. Our role in our own formation is our piece of the Einar's harmony, which is why we have the ability to shape ourselves and the world around us. In filmmaking, the contributions, twists, and even derailments of personnel or extraneous factors are baked into the creative intent from the first. As directors, we expect and even desire for actors to contribute their own creativity to a role, be it new takes on how to deliver a line or improvising new lines completely. During the making of 2013's The Wolf of Wall Street, Leonardo DiCaprio took note of an odd vocal warm-up his co-star Matthew McConaughey would do between takes. He was so amused by it that he suggested they put it in the movie, and thus one of the most iconic movie moments of the 2010s was born. The strange chest thumping and humming that became a calling card of The Wolf of Wall Street was not in the script, nor even suggested by director Martin Scorsese. But as any great director does, Scorsese managed to incorporate this idiosyncrasy into the finished film. The freedom granted to the participants in the filmmaking process allows for their own creative contributions, which are then brought into the finished product. And while these specifics are not scripted by the director, the room for these contributions was always the artistic intent. However, this also opens the system up to conflict. In the very first theme, Melkor immediately abuses his freedom and attempts to enact his own creation. But like a skilled director incorporating positive improvisation into the final film, Iluvatar is also able to do the same with Melkor's negative improvisation, saying, "And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined." Melkor's discord does not undo the music, nor defeat it, nor does it even originate beyond the Einar's initial song. When their themes clashed, its most triumphant notes were taken by the other and woven into its own solemn pattern. Participation was Iluvatar's intent. So even if Melkor's rebellion was not a part of the design, the possibility of such a rebellion was always accounted for. When a director invites a talented but difficult actor to a project, he does not do so out of a desire for strife, but the potentiality of conflict is necessitated by virtue of the actor's presence on set. So when you see behind-the-scenes videos of an actor and director clashing over creative differences, it may seem like things are not going according to plan. However, these conflicts are baked into the creative design of the filmmaking process, consented to by the director in their choice of hiring that particular actor. And a skilled filmmaker will find a way to work through that discord for the good of the final product. The goal of that director is not to limit or eliminate the freedom of his collaborators, but to make sure that what ends up on screen is only the best of the problematic actor's performance. The hope that guides the production process is the vision of the end, planned from the beginning to endure whatever unknowns assail it. And to better understand all this talk of judging the beginning by the end, let's take a quick look at an example in Tolkien's books and their film adaptations. So, the relationship between the Lord of the Rings films and the Hobbit films is distinct from the relationship between the books in one significant way. The Lord of the Rings books were written as a sequel to The Hobbit, while the Hobbit films were created as a prequel to the Lord of the Rings movies. This may sound like a distinction without a difference, but it's actually fairly significant. A prequel is not designed to stand alone. It is designed to remind you of something familiar and contextualize a story you already know. The Hobbit book is not a prequel to The Lord of the Rings because it was crafted as its own story, with its own style and for its own ends. Tolkien himself remarked that it was quite independently conceived. He did not know as he began that it belonged. And it was only after the introduction of the Lord of the Rings books that The Hobbit was recontextualized into the grander vision of Arda, to the point where Tolkien famously had to go back and tweak a few scenes to better align it with the broader story. This recontextualization aligns with how the early Christians began to re-examine their sacred texts in light of the crucifixion and resurrection. The Hebrew scriptures stood alone, functioned on their own, but in the light of Christ, they are read anew, with the veil that previously obscured them now lifted, to borrow some language from the Apostle Paul. And this principle from Paul tells us something important, namely that this new reading of these old texts was not just something people had missed the whole time, but was only possible because of this unveiling, only visible because the end of the story had finally been revealed. As Irenaeus says, every prophecy before its fulfillment is nothing but an enigma and an ambiguity to human beings. But when the time has arrived and the prediction has come to pass, then it has an exact exposition. So from the human perspective, the ambiguity of the Hebrew scriptures was impenetrable until Christ opened our eyes to show that this whole time they spoke of him. Likewise, the Hobbit's place in the narrative of Arda was limited until the arrival of the Lord of the Rings books unveiled the broader story, and we suddenly were able to see how this quaint little adventure was actually a significant chapter in an epic clash between good and evil. Gollum's ring, initially just a prize for a game well won, with convenient powers of invisibility to aid in the quest, is suddenly shown to be the weapon of the enemy, lost for all these years and now violently sought by Sauron. Even the music of the Einar, as it is being sung, remains ambiguous to its participants, until Iluvatar grants the gods a brief vision of what their harmony has wrought in the void, which was no longer void, a brief glimpse of the end towards which their music was always moving. All of these follow the same pattern of the beginning only making sense through a revelation of the end, and that understanding unfolding in the present. But just as Irenaeus insists that we can only theologize from within the economy, as we observe it and understand it, so we, in the world as we know it, can only understand the present unfolding in redemptive terms. For us, there is no music of the Einar that lacks Melkor's incursion. Even if we were able to speculate about a prelapsarian Eden or a pre-fallen state of the cosmos, no human in living memory or recorded history has ever inhabited such a world. But likewise, this means we have no understanding of God apart from his role as Redeemer. This is why Irenaeus has initially counterintuitive frameworks, such as starting with the one on the cross as the first principle of theology, rather than treating it as a theological conclusion, makes so much pragmatic sense. While Christ is our creator, we know him first and foremost as our Savior, because he is made known to us as God through his sacrifice on the cross. So if Christ is firstly our Savior, then his role as creator can only be understood in light of salvation. And therefore, there is no separating the concept of creation from the concept of salvation, nor is there any way to understand creation without a component of redemption. When examined closely, even the Genesis account, read in isolation, fits this pattern. Taking the narrative on its own terms, creation is wrought through the molding of existing matter and the ordering of existing chaos. It is not when things merely exist that they are called good, but only once God has finished transforming them. The God that weaves discordant melodies back into a final, more glorious polyphony is the only creator made known to us. And it may seem, at this point, a silly metaphor when paired with all this grand fiction and theological terminology, but to return to filmmaking, there comes a point for many actors in a production where they are forced to simply surrender to the process and learn to trust their director, give themselves to a role, and they're not always rewarded with understanding until they're actually watching the movie. But at the screening, not only are the questions answered and the performance displayed in its coherent entirety, but the actor is finally able to understand their place in the emotional intent of the film, witnessing how their performance moves an audience as the director designed, and seeing the personal reactions of those invested in the story they helped bring to life. A script presents a vision, a production gives everyone a tangible glimpse of that vision, but it is only the completed movie that truly shows it forth. In like manner, the music of the Aigner presents a vision encapsulated by the theme, yet beyond it, prefigured within its song, yet more. But Tolkien's story does not end with the unfolding of creation in the present, for there is a second music of the Aigner, sung not just by the Aigner alone, but the children of Iluvatar as well, in which the themes of Iluvatar shall be played aright and take being in the moment of their utterance, for then all shall understand fully his intent in their part, and each shall know the comprehension of each. The knowledge lacking in the initial vision is provided in its culmination. Note Tolkien's language, played aright, not anew or again or differently. Despite its name, this does not appear to be a brand new song played for the first time, but the original composition of Iluvatar played to perfection. Just as the Aigner caught a glimpse of the full history of Ea in the vision, but the true quiddity of that history was something to be lived and inhabited by them, so the second music of the Aigner is brought about when the process of maturation reaches its climax, when each singer is fully formed, fully made, and fully capable of participating in the role they were always meant to inhabit. Despite all their power, even the gods of Arda who participate in shaping the world and its creatures do not fully understand their place in the euphony of creation until that final culmination. Just as we, those created to be gods in this world, only see presently as through a glass dimly, but then at the end we will see face to face and know in full even as we are known. An actor's final performance on screen does not include every take, every blooper, every messed up line. The film is the culmination of their work played aright. The discord gone, the mistakes fixed, the creative working of the filmmaker recapitulating even the unintended contributions into a fuller telling of the story. The themes prefigured in pre-production are not discarded, but brought to completion, and the three distinct stages are shown to have always been one. New creation completes creation. It does not replace it. The fleeting vision of a new heavens and a new earth we glimpse through the pages of Scripture is not a promise that this present reality is bound for the cosmic dustbin, but that the original creative work of God will come to its most beautiful completion. In the opening moments of the Bible, God says, "Let there be light," and there was, but that first light casts a shadow. It does not fill all things until creation is complete, until God is all in all. And that is why, in this incomplete world, we see the clearest revelation of God appearing at the paradoxical intersection of life and death. We see Jesus Christ, the light who has come into the world, slain by the world he came to save. And yet this moment is nothing less than creation itself. Christ's descent into death to call us into life epitomizes God's descent into nothingness to bring forth being. Creation and salvation are theologically synonymous. And in both, we see that God's very existence, and by extent, existence as such, is foundationally predicated upon self-giving love. But we are not God. And while that might be the end goal as God seeks to sanctify us and divinize us and unite us to himself as partakers of the divine nature, we too often seek our own messy and tumultuous ends. As Tolkien warns, the sub-creator wishes to be the Lord and God of his private creation. He will rebel against the laws of the creator, especially against mortality. Both of these, alone or together, will lead to the desire for power. Like Melkor, we see equality with God as something to be grasped, failing to realize that dominance can never lead to lasting power. In the laying down of his life for mankind and the outpouring of his very self for the making of all things, Christ shows us that he who loses his life shall find it, that creation is only brought about by surrender, not conquest, and only when we yield ourselves as clay in the hands of our Maker, actors trusting their director, only then can we be formed to find our place in the final song. Creation is a work of redemption, and God is continually enacting this work, conforming death into a birth canal to life, transfiguring suffering into a sharing of Christ's glory, weaving the most triumphant notes back into the solemn pattern. Melkor himself comes to see that no theme exists apart from Iluvatar, that nothing he seeks to make stands apart from Iluvatar's making, and that nothing he seeks to destroy escapes renewal. We do not always see how this can be at present. We see only as through a glass dimly, which is to say, we see only discord in process. And therefore we rest not in comprehensive knowledge of the final picture, but the hope offered by glimpsing it. Like Sam catching a glimpse of a white star high above the forsaken land and allowing its beauty to smite his heart and rejuvenate his hope, we too can hold fast to our brief and glorious glimpse of the end, use it to judge the goodness of our beginning, and trust in the gloomy present that the shadows of this life are only small and passing things, for there is light and high beauty forever beyond their reach. Thank you. I've read that passage like 500 times, and it chokes me up that's like one of the most beautiful paragraphs in the English language.
Well done for Brian for suggesting it as a
Yes,
theme.
no, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Benjamin.
Thank you.
Questions? Let's go. I'm all stirred at the thought of being a problematic actor. What kind of an actor?
Yeah, my metaphor really is predicated on the film actually, being good. No analogies are perfect.
I just kept waiting for you to say the word jazz.
Yeah, that'd have been a fun metaphor too. Maybe if we did a pure music. There are so many options for the analogy of like symphonic creation. I mean, I've had a bunch of patristic quotes in there, but Irenaeus has a whole paragraph in Against Heresies about how creation and salvation are God aligning everyone to the symphony of his making. Athanasius has a whole thing about how all of creation is it's not symphony. He says something like a lute or a lyre played upon multiple strings. Yeah, there's honestly there's too many metaphors we could use.
Yeah, the Corrie ten Boom one is like the reverse side of a tapestry, which is just all threads hanging loose.
Actually, yeah, John Baer brought that up in one of the lectures that I heard when researching.
And we don't see the full thing. No. We just see the loose threads.
Just a glimpse.
Okay. I love your questions, Janet. That aren't questions. Who'd like to go? I'm happy to ask one of mine. Sometimes we need that just to get us moving in our thoughts. So you talked about the abusability of the freedom that we receive. Mm-hmm. Is that what we mean by sin?
Yeah, probably. I mean, that's at least sin. If that is not sin itself, sin would have to be a subcategory of that. I enjoy the definition of sin that speaks of sort of it being a misalignment with God. Some people talk about the etymology of the word in Greek being the archery term to miss the mark. I think that is one of the most helpful definitions of it, because it sort of is flexible enough to not be just like a list of seemingly arbitrary rules. So the goal of giving us the ability to create is to participate in the good making of God. But I think Melchior is the good example of, that is sin when he tries to go and make his own thing. I used a little bit of Paul's language. He makes that reference to Adam and Eve when he talks about Christ did not see equality with God as something to be grasped, the way Adam and Eve, grasp at the fruit and try to take the knowledge for themselves rather than waiting. A lot of the fathers say that God would have given them the fruit after they'd matured enough to receive it. I mean, again, if it's not sin, sin has to be a part of that.
I'm just wondering, from the perspective of the director, what do you do with these sinful actors?
Well, again, you must appreciate how I managed to construct a metaphor that made me God
exactly.
in the analogy. No, it's a little, again, it's not a perfect analogy because there's more of an equality there in terms of creative equals or collaborative equals. Technically, the hierarchy of a film set is usually that which the director does have sort of absolute say over when an actor does, but I mean, there's exceptions to every rule. So I don't know if I would always call, in the metaphor it works as sin. It's not necessarily always sin in real life when an actor does their own thing, but if they're doing their own thing for selfish ends in ways that disrupt the cohesion of the vision that everyone else is working towards, right? Because film is a collaborative thing where everyone's trying to do the same thing, bringing their own artistic contributions in their own independent ways to bring about the same end. So if an actor is just, trying to add more lines so that they're on screen for longer, I think that would fall into the metaphor of sin quite well.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah.
In some of our side conversations, we were talking about Paralandra,
Yes.
which is this awesome book by C.S. Lewis, which he talks about the possibility of humanity reaching that maturation without actually sinning.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to talk a little bit more about that, about how, I guess I have a problem sometimes with the idea that somehow sin was necessary for us to mature, when it's sin's bad.
No,
bad.
and I completely agree.
But in part of this, this co-create, this participatory actions, there would have been space for us to come to that maturity without darkness.
Yeah, it's a very, very thin line. Irenaeus is tricky on this, and I love working off of his work, but he's very difficult here because he really does speak of sin in pedagogical terms. He really does. He talks about, is it theoretically possible that an infant could learn to walk without falling down? Sure, maybe. But we know that never, ever, ever happens. And again, he's really a pragmatist. He says if you're engaging with these hypotheticals about how God could have done something differently, you're already talking about a different God because God didn't do it that way. Which again is very frustrating to philosophy types who love hypotheticals. So I would say that the notion of sin as pedagogy is coherent up until a point, and it sort of loses the ability to make sense, not in the possibility of sin, but in the severity of it, right? There are certain evils in this world that I don't think any reasonable person could say teach any valuable lessons, either individually or collectively. Like some horrors are just so horrible. And Origen sort of addresses this. He has a quote where he says something along the lines of, I can give you a general accounting of why the necessity of sin might exist, but you would be an idiot to apply it to particular circumstances. So I think the balance that we sort of have to strike is, at that broad level, we can hold to a hope of somehow God will work all the discordant melody into a final, glorious, wonderful end. But our command as Christians in individual circumstances is not to comfort the grieving mother by saying, don't worry, it's all going to be okay in the end, but to weep with those who weep. So that's, I feel like I've strayed from your question a little bit, but hopefully that addressed some of it.
I'm curious if you've read Leaf by Nigel, Tolkien's other work, where there's an artist who wants to make this beautiful forest scene, but is only able to paint one leaf before he passes on or moves on. And he's like, oh no, I wanted to build this forest, but I only made this leaf. And the leaf ends up becoming this beautiful thing for everybody, which as far as I know is his only work that he says was allegory. And so what you would say to that in terms of like, sometimes we want to create more, but we can't, and how that kind of maybe would have been God's intention overall.
Yeah, was it one of the speakers earlier who said something about leaving part of creation unfinished because there's a part that only God can accomplish? I feel like somebody was talking about that earlier. I need to reread it. I think I read it at the beginning of college, but I don't remember anything from that long ago. Even though I think the subcreation quote I pulled was from an edition of that I was skimming. Yeah,
we're going to hear about Leaf by Niggle in the next presentation.
Oh, perfect.
So
yeah,
don't worry.
I'll leave
don't
it to
worry
him to
about
expand
leaving.
on that.
You are
But yes.
allowed to leave it unfinished so that it can be finished.
All I would say to that is there is absolutely a limit to subcreation. Subcreation at its best, I think, is a participation in the creation that can only be started by God, because as created beings, we necessarily originate in nothingness. And it can only be truly brought to completion by God just because, one, we don't have the power to bring it about by ourselves, and two, we mess it up when we try to. So I do think there's definitely theological richness in contemplating the unfinished work, whether unfinished because our life is cut short for some reason, or unfinished because we're not capable of. You could even actually, sorry, I'm thinking out loud here, you could even apply that in some ways to the Silmarillion, right? All the stuff that was published posthumously for Tolkien, which I guess wouldn't really be the literary intent to have it play into that. But yeah, no, that's a great observation. I'm going to stop rambling now.
But it's a Silmarillion question.
Oh dear.
But well, yes,
You're gonna
wave it
reveal how
around
much I'm a
because
C.S.
holding it.
Lewis guy more than
No. Because, and that's cool that you just mentioned that actually, because I couldn't quite shape the thought, but I was thinking a lot about how, in specifically, Aule makes the dwarves as this element of subcreation, but then has to be finalized or, you know, what am I looking?
I
That's my
did not
question.
have room for that in this paper, but the implication there is so interesting for this, right? Because Melkor's sin is attempting to enact his own creation outside of Iluvatar's design and go his own way and stuff, right? Aule does the same thing when he makes the dwarves, except he comes back and repents to Iluvatar and basically says, I'm so sorry, I should never have done this, I'll kill them. And Iluvatar says, no, I'm going to adopt them as children of Iluvatar alongside the ones that I made. And I didn't think of that until like the last draft of this and knew I didn't have time to include it anyway, but maybe that's next year's paper because... yeah. No, just, the implications there of accepting what should have been like sinful subcreation and adopting, that's so interesting to me. There's so many ways you could expand on that, and I probably will at some point.
Fantastic. Let us say thank you to Benjamin Carlucci. Thank you. All right, then. We are not at the end. We're at the end of